I had emergency surgery for a ruptured ovarian cyst and internal bleeding about a year ago. Never expected it would end my relationship, but it showed me who my boyfriend really was when things got tough. When I woke up with excruciating pain one night, Mason rushed me to the ER. The doctors quickly found a ruptured cyst causing internal bleeding and said they needed to operate immediately. Mason held my hand before they wheeled me in, promised he'd be waiting when I woke up, told me everything would be okay. In that moment, terrified and in pain, his presence was everything I needed. The surgery ended up being more extensive than expected. They removed one ovary and had to repair damage to surrounding tissue. The recovery would be longer and more difficult than we'd initially thought. During the first couple days in the hospital, Mason seemed supportive, brought my favorite snacks, helped adjust my pillows, kept our families updated. Everything changed once I got home. Mason became distant, always on his phone or suddenly remembering errands that needed to be done. I was in too much pain and too foggy from medication to really process what was happening. I just assumed he was stressed about work or something. 3 days after coming home from the hospital, I woke up from a medication-induced nap to find Mason packing a duffel bag in our bedroom. When I asked what he was doing, he actually said he couldn't handle this situation, and that things had been rough between us for a while. This was complete news to me. We'd had normal couple disagreements sometimes, but nothing that signaled he was unhappy enough to leave. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was barely able to walk to the bathroom by myself, and he'd been planning to sneak out while I was medicated. He admitted he'd been planning to leave a note for me to find when I woke up. A note. After 2 years together, I deserved a note while I was lying there with surgical staples in my abdomen. When I pointed out that I literally couldn't take care of myself yet, he just shrugged and said my mom was coming tomorrow anyway. When I reminded him I had major surgery days ago and could barely stand, he told me I was being dramatic, because people have surgeries all the time. As if major abdominal surgery with organ removal was like getting a tooth pulled. I told him to get out and take all his stuff. He grabbed his bag, said he'd already arranged to stay at his friend Dan's place until he found something permanent, said he'd come back for the rest when I was better. Then he hesitated at the door and said, "I'm sorry it worked out this way." Like our relationship was a job interview that didn't pan out. Then he was gone. I heard the front door close, his car starting. I lay there crying, wondering how I'd even get my pain meds from the kitchen when I couldn't walk. I called my friend Cassidy, who came over immediately. She was furious when she saw my condition, unable to get to the bathroom alone, in severe pain, medication wearing off, and completely abandoned. My mom arrived the next day as planned. Between her, Cassidy, and a rotation of other friends, I had someone with me for the first week of recovery. After that, I could move around enough to manage alone, though it was still painful and difficult. I'll never forget how my friend stepped up when the person who should have been there for me walked out. Mason texted twice that month, once asking when he could get his remaining things and once to give me his new address. No questions about how I was feeling or if I needed anything. No acknowledgement of what he'd done. My brother and Cassidy packed his belongings into boxes and dropped them off at his new place. I had them keep the key he'd left behind. The physical recovery was rough. I couldn't lift anything heavier than a gallon of milk, couldn't stand for more than a few minutes, had to be careful not to tear my incisions. But the emotional recovery was so much worse. I'd trusted this person completely, never imagining he could be so selfish and cold. For weeks after the surgery, I'd wake up panicking in the middle of the night, the memory of watching him pack while I lay helpless replaying in my mind. Follow-up appointments with my surgeon brought more difficult news. He explained that losing an ovary and the scarring from surgery might affect my fertility in the future. All those conversations Mason and I had about having kids someday took on a bitter new meaning. He'd not only abandoned me when I needed him most, but also walked away from the potential complications that might affect our future plans. Complications from a medical emergency that wasn't my fault. I started seeing a therapist to deal with the abandonment trauma. She helped me understand that what Mason did wasn't normal or acceptable, that his behavior revealed a character flaw, not a problem with me or our relationship. People show you who they really are in a crisis, she told me. He showed you he can't be counted on when things get difficult. I decided I couldn't stay in our apartment. Every corner held memories of Mason, and I couldn't stomach being in the bedroom where he'd packed his bags while I lay recovering. I found a smaller but brighter apartment across town, with big windows and a small balcony. My brother and friends helped me move once I was physically able. In my new place, I started rebuilding. I painted the walls colors Mason would have hated, bought new furniture that held no memories of him, arranged my space exactly how I wanted it. I adopted a cat named Pixel from the local shelter, a gentle orange tabby who seemed to sense when my pain was flaring up and would curl up against me on bad days. I started volunteering at the animal shelter where I'd adopted Pixel once I was physically able. The simple act of caring for animals who needed help healed something in me that therapy couldn't quite reach. Gradually, I got stronger both physically and emotionally. My surgical scars faded to thin silver lines. I learned to manage the occasional pain flare-ups. I made new friends, went back to work, and even went on a few casual dates, though nothing serious. I was cautious now, watching for red flags I might have missed with Mason. 6 months after Mason walked out, I was finally feeling like myself again. I'd developed new routines, new friendships, new priorities. I'd learned to sleep alone again, to enjoy my own company, to trust my judgment. Then, out of nowhere, Mason called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. He started with awkward small talk, asking how I was doing, if I was all better now. When I questioned why he cared after 6 months of silence, he claimed he'd been doing a lot of soul searching and had really grown as a person. Said he missed me and our life together. I laughed, actually laughed out loud. I told him he doesn't get to miss someone he abandoned when they were recovering from major surgery. He claimed he had panicked and wasn't ready for all that sickness stuff, but had changed and wanted to make it up to me. I asked how exactly he planned to make up for leaving me when I couldn't walk. How do you compensate someone for showing them they can't count on you when it really matters? He begged to meet for coffee, said he really needed to talk. Something in his voice sounded desperate, not just manipulative, so against my better judgment, I agreed to meet at a cafe near my new place. When I saw Mason at the coffee shop, I almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost at least 20 pounds, and not in a healthy way. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His usually well-groomed hair was limp and unwashed. He was hunched over a coffee cup, nervously shredding a napkin. After minimal small talk, he admitted he'd been fired from his job last month for repeatedly showing up late. Without income, he couldn't pay rent and lost his apartment. He'd been staying with friends, but his main crash pad at Dan's was ending because Dan's girlfriend was tired of having him on their couch. His parents were traveling in Europe for 2 months. He'd been sleeping in his car for the past 3 nights. Then came the real reason for our meeting. He wanted to move back in with me just until he got back on his feet. Claimed he had job prospects, and it wouldn't be long. He actually expected me to house him after what he'd done. The audacity was stunning. This man abandoned me when I was at my most vulnerable, recovering from surgery because my body was literally bleeding internally. He walked out without a backward glance, leaving me to figure out how to care for myself when I couldn't even stand up. And now, 6 months later, he's having a tough time, so he thinks he can just move back in. When I pointed this out, he got defensive, claimed I was being vindictive and enjoying his suffering, said his behavior was just a mistake, and that I was cold for not helping him. Told me this was why he left. Because I was so unforgiving. The mental gymnastics were almost impressive. As I gathered my things to leave, he actually shouted that I'd regret this when I needed someone again. I turned back and simply said, I already needed someone. You weren't there. 2 weeks later, my therapist asked if I felt guilty about not helping Mason. I didn't. I told her that nearly bleeding to death and being abandoned changes your perspective on obligation. I realized that helping someone who hurt me that badly wasn't kindness. It was self-harm. She nodded and said, sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is to close doors that should stay closed. A month after our coffee shop confrontation, Mason texted that he'd found a job and a new place to live. He admitted I was right and apologized for what he'd said at the cafe. I didn't respond, just deleted his number. His problems weren't my responsibility anymore. That night, I made dinner in my cozy apartment, Pixel purring at my feet as I chopped vegetables. My new boyfriend Eli called to confirm our weekend plans. We'd been dating for 2 months. When he asked how I was feeling that day, I knew he genuinely wanted to know the answer. 6 months later, a full year after Mason left, I was packing for a weekend trip with Eli when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Mason standing in my hallway, looking uncomfortable but better than he had at the coffee shop. He'd gained weight back, looked clean and put together. He'd gotten my address from Cassidy by claiming an emergency. Turned out he was moving across the country for a new job and wanted to apologize properly before leaving. For the first time, his apology seemed genuine, not motivated by what he needed from me but by actual remorse. He acknowledged that what he did was unforgivable and that he'd been selfish and immature. Said he'd been in therapy too, working on his fear of illness and dependency. I appreciated the closure but told him that chapter of my life was firmly closed. When Eli arrived later, I told him about the encounter. He asked if I was okay, and I realized I truly was. Better than okay. I'd finally let go of the last bit of anger I'd been carrying. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives turn out to be blessings in disguise. If Mason hadn't shown his true colors when I needed him most, I might have married him, had children with him, built a life with someone who would abandon me when things got difficult. Instead, I got to rebuild my life on my terms. I discovered strength I never knew I had. I learned who my real friends were. And I found someone who understands that love means showing up, especially when it's hard. Honestly, this whole experience taught me something I'll never forget. People's actions during your lowest moments reveal who they truly are. Mason showed me he couldn't handle hardship. My friends showed me they'd drop everything to help. And Eli shows me every day what real partnership looks like. TBH, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd let Mason move back in that day at the coffee shop. Would he have changed? Would I have forgiven him? IDK, and I don't need to know. Some bridges should stay burned.